There's a company in England that has spent the last 200 years doing something that sounds impossible. It literally prints money. Not its own money, real money. The actual banknotes that end up in wallets and cash registers across dozens of countries around the world. At its peak, it was widely described as the largest commercial banknote printer on the planet. And then, a few years ago, the company that prints money for half the world quietly admitted it might be about to run out of it. Let that actually register? A business whose entire job is manufacturing cash, the physical stuff everyone else spends their life chasing, stood up in front of its investors and warned that it might not survive the year. How does that even happen? How do you go broke while running the presses for the world's money? The answer opens up one of the strangest industries almost nobody knows exists. And once you understand how it actually makes money, the whole thing stops sounding impossible and starts sounding like a warning. So, let me introduce you to the company, because you have almost certainly held its work in your hands without ever knowing the name. It is called De La Rue, British, with roots stretching all the way back to the early 1800s. It began humbly, printing things like playing cards and postage stamps, and by the 1860s it had moved into currency, growing over generations into the quiet giant of a very secretive trade. Here is a piece of history most people never hear. As the old European empires broke apart during the 20th century, dozens of brand new nations suddenly needed something every country must have: their own money. They did not have the factories or the security expertise to make it, so many of them turned to the same place. De La Rue printed some of the very first banknotes for a number of newly independent countries, Pakistan among them. At the birth of a new nation, its flag raised for the very first time, the cash in its citizens' hands was rolling off a printing line back in England. That is the kind of reach this company had. At full stretch, it could turn out billions of banknotes a year. The company says it works with governments, central banks, and other customers in around 140 countries, and that it supplies finished banknotes to roughly half of the world's central banks and issuing authorities. To put the scale in perspective, at one point the firm said it could produce something like 6 billion banknotes in a single year. 6 billion from one company most people have never even heard of. Most people assume money comes from some secret government building buried deep underground. In reality, a huge slice of the world's physical cash is not made by governments at all. It gets outsourced, handed to a private company that wins the contract, prints the notes, and ships them out. The money in your pocket may well have rolled off a commercial production line owned by shareholders, made by a firm that has to turn a profit like any other. So, if you print money for a living, how is this not the single greatest business in all of human history? This is where the charm ends and the real economics begin. Because printing a banknote has almost nothing in common with printing a poster. A banknote is one of the most sophisticated manufactured objects a normal person ever touches. It has to survive years of folding, washing, crumpling, and being crammed into pockets. More importantly, it has to carry security features that stop the entire global economy from being drowned in fakes. Consider everything hidden in a single note: special paper or polymer that feels nothing like ordinary paper, watermarks pressed into the material itself, holograms that flash as the light moves, threads and fibers woven right through the fabric of the note, inks that shift color when you tilt them, and other inks that stay invisible until they hit a certain kind of light. Every one of those features is a tiny front in a never-ending war against counterfeiters, and those counterfeiters get smarter every single year. All of it costs a fortune to invent and a fortune to run. You need secure facilities, because you're quite literally making money and cannot have it strolling out the back door. You need constant research, because the day your security features get cracked is the day they become worthless. This is a high-cost, high-stakes, heavily guarded manufacturing operation, not some infinite money glitch. Strip away the mystique, and you are left with a factory carrying punishing overheads that happens to produce cash instead of cars. And once those notes are printed, a second headache begins. One most people never stop to consider. How do you move billions in fresh currency across the planet without becoming the richest robbery target in history? The finished money travels under conditions closer to a military operation than a delivery run. Guarded transport, sealed containers, insurance that costs a fortune on its own, Routes and schedules kept deliberately secret. Every step from the printing floor to a foreign central bank's vault is another expense, another risk, and another reason this business is far heavier and far more fragile than it first appears. And that feeds straight into the first trap, because a company like this does not get to decide how much money to print. Its customers decide, and its customers are governments and central banks. That is a very particular kind of customer. There are only so many of them in the world. They buy in enormous, lumpy contracts that can be worth a fortune one year and completely gone the next. And they hold nearly all the power in the relationship. When a central bank puts its banknote work out to tender, printers from around the globe scramble to bid, and they compete mostly on one thing, which is price. So even when the product is money itself, the margins can get squeezed painfully thin, because there is always a rival somewhere willing to print those notes a little cheaper. So this is not a company that prints whatever it likes and rolls an easy profit. It is a contractor, it survives by winning contracts, and it can be gutted by losing them. And this contractor does not have the field to itself. The secretive world of printing money comes down to a small handful of serious players scattered across the globe, a private German rival among them, all fighting over the same limited pool of government work. And then the ground rules shifted under everyone at once. Decades ago, Australia pioneered a new kind of banknote made from polymer, a thin, durable plastic that outlasts paper and is far harder to counterfeit. One country after another began switching over. For the printers, that change meant pouring money into new materials and new machinery just to stay in the running. Standing still stopped being an option. You either kept investing to make the most advanced, most secure notes on Earth, or you slowly priced yourself out of every contract that mattered. All of which set the stage for what began to happen next. The first big blow was not even about banknotes. It was a passport, the British passport. For years, De La Rue, a proud British institution, printed the passport of the United Kingdom. Then the government put that contract up for renewal, a deal valued at up to £500 million over a decade, and handed it to a foreign competitor instead. A firm from mainland Europe would now produce the British passport, and it won for one plain reason. It was cheaper. The reaction back home was pure fury. The thought of the iconic British passport being made abroad became a national scandal, plastered across every front page. Politicians raged about it for weeks, and yet the decision held because the government chose to save the taxpayer money over saving national pride. For De La Rue, it was a brutal lesson in who really holds the cards. You can be a 200-year-old symbol of your nation and still lose your biggest home contract to a lower bid. Sentiment does not pay the bills. The winning tender does. Losing one contract, even an enormous one, was survivable on its own. The deeper danger was something much bigger, creeping up on the entire industry at the same time. The world was quietly falling out of love with cash. Look at your own habits over the past several years. The tap of a card, a phone waved over a reader at the checkout, that little app that splits a dinner bill in seconds. Every one of those small conveniences is a banknote that never got printed. Multiply that across billions of people, and you get a slow, grinding decline in demand for the exact product this company exists to make. A banknote printer in a world going cashless is a bit like an ice merchant watching everyone bring home a refrigerator. The core business does not vanish overnight, but the ground keeps sliding out from under it, year after year after year. Now stack these pressures on top of one another, and you can see the vice closing. Thin margins from savage competition. A shrinking market as cash slowly falls out of use. The loss of major contracts, layer on some heavy debt, a few strategic missteps, and a giant pension bill left over from its long industrial history, and you have a business being squeezed from every direction at once. Behind the scenes, the drama was just as messy. Leadership churned, with chief executives arriving, promising to fix everything and leaving again. Frustrated investors pushed hard for change. And every fresh plan to turn the company around seemed to slam into the same stubborn wall, a shrinking market sitting on top of a mountain of costs that refused to shrink with it. Remember, this was no faceless startup, but a 200-year-old institution employing thousands of people, a name woven into the history of the country, and it was visibly wobbling. The warnings started arriving one after another. Profit forecasts cut, then trimmed again, then slashed a third time. Each grim announcement knocked the share price lower and drained a little more confidence out of the market. Investors began to wonder out loud whether the company had any future at all. And then came the moment that turned a struggling firm into a genuine headline around the world. De La Rue issued what is called a going concern warning. In plain language, that is a company formally telling everyone there is serious doubt about whether it can keep operating. It is one of the most alarming sentences a business can ever say out loud. And here it was being said by the company that prints money for a large chunk of the planet. The firm that manufactures cash was announcing that it might not have enough of its own to survive. A big part of that fear came down to timing. A loan was coming due. A repayment the company was not confident it could actually make. And without a fix, the situation could fall apart fast. So, the very same organization that ships billions in freshly printed currency around the world found itself staring at its own accounts, wondering how on earth it would pay what it owed. The irony was almost too neat to believe. The money printer had a cash problem. So how does a story like this end? Not with the presses going silent, at least not yet. The rescue came the way these things usually do, through a deal. De La Rue agreed to sell off a part of the business and rebuild around what remained, with a larger partner stepping in to help clear the loan that had been hanging over its neck. It was a lifeline, and it worked well enough to pull the company back from the edge. But look closely at what survival actually meant. Selling pieces of itself, shrinking, leaning on someone bigger just to stay alive. The 200-year-old giant did not defeat its problem. It escaped it, smaller and humbler than before. And that is the part worth carrying with you, because it flips the whole story completely on its head. Printing money buys you no magic permit to be rich. It is a business, and it bows to the same cold rules as every other business on Earth. It answers to customers who hold all the power, and it lives and dies on contracts it does not control. Worst of all, it can be quietly hollowed out by a shift in the world so gradual that hardly anyone notices, right up until the company that once seemed untouchable is fighting just to keep its doors open. The most powerful sounding business you could possibly dream up, the one that actually makes the cash, turned out to be just as exposed as a corner shop the moment its customers changed their habits. Being essential is not the same thing as being safe. And nothing on this planet, not even the machine that prints the money, gets to skip the economics. Quick thing before you head off. If this shifted the way you see the cash sitting in your pocket, dropping a like on the video would genuinely mean a lot. And it pushes the story out to more curious people who would never find it otherwise. Now, I have got a real question for you, and I actually want the answer. Be honest, when was the last time you handed over a physical banknote to pay for anything? Leave it below, and tell me which country you are tuning in from while you're at it. Because the answer swings wildly depending on where in the world you happen to live. And if cracking open the money stories that most people walk straight past sounds like your kind of thing, the subscribe button is sitting right there waiting for you. Really glad you spent this time here, and I hope the world feels a little less mysterious than it did 20 minutes ago.